Jacob was a jerk. Am I allowed to say that in church? I'm allowed to say that? Okay. When we meet him in this story, he is still a long way from even starting the arduous journey of trying to be the person that God wanted him to be. Do you remember the ugly details of the story? Jacob was born as a twin. Esau, his brother, was born first. And so by tradition, it was Esau and not Jacob who was to get his father's blessing and inherit most of the lands and animals and wealth. But Jacob conned Esau into allowing him to get his father's blessing. Then he made it official by going to his father and deceiving him. His dad was blind, and Esau was a very hairy man. So he covered himself with animal skins, went before his blind father, and asked for his blessing. It was successful. On top of all this, he was probably self-indulgent and gladly sat back while Esau did all the work. Today, with the diagnoses that are probably the diagnosis of the year, we would label him narcissistic personality disorder. Now, when we finally meet Jacob in this story, he is fleeing his homeland because after all he has done, he is afraid that Esau might kill him. He is tired, probably scared and hungry, and he needs to sleep for the night. Were we not loving Christians, we might say he deserves it. And were we honest, we might say that there's a little bit of Jacob in all of us. Jacob finds some stones to lay his head on because unfortunately, beauty rest pillows had not been invented. He falls into a dream-filled sleep, and he dreams the dream that you heard in the reading. It was so vivid that he remembered it when he woke up. There was a ladder, and I left my ladder over with the children, and angels were climbing up and down it, doing God's work. And there, beside Jacob, was God. And God, best of all, was telling Jacob that he would bless him and protect him and his descendants for the rest of his life. God appeared not up in heaven, but down on the earth beside Jacob, beside a man who might be somewhat less than welcome in some of our churches today. As flawed a person as Jacob seemed to be, as flawed as we appear to be, if we're honest, God did not and does not put any conditions on his love for us. He did not say to Jacob, I will bless you and be with you if you... He doesn't say any of that. So imagine the relief and the sense of security that Jacob must have felt after his flight from possible death in Beersheba and after his hunger and exhaustion and fear. One might think that this was an obvious time for Jacob to get religion, to finally commit to honoring the God of his ancestors. But no, not our Jacob. He is still a manipulative, self-centered guy. He decides that he is going to impose conditions on his relationship with God. In today's reading, we hear, if God will be with me and will watch over me, and if he will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, and if I return to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God. And all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. No false piety here. Still self-centered and manipulative. Now, Jacob's ladder is seen as the connection between heaven and earth, between the physical and the spiritual realms. For those of you who study Carl Jung, it's the connection between the divine, self-conscious, and the self. For us, the ladder can symbolize our relationship and our connection with God. We can see every rung as a step, a deed, a prayer, something that we do that increases our relationship with the divine. Sometimes people who are dying express the fear that they have not climbed enough rungs of the ladder to be acceptable into heaven. Yet, it was here on earth, in this world, beside Jacob, a sad and sorry Jacob using a rock for a pillow, that God appeared. Obviously, God felt overwhelming love for Jacob, even Jacob, despite his many shortcomings, and even for us, despite our many shortcomings. I think this is really important to note because it is only when we understand unconditional love, when we feel loved, really loved, that we are able to reach out to help others, when we have the strength to climb that ladder and the strength to reach out and strive for a deeper relationship with God. God descended the ladder to be with Jacob, to be with us. And God didn't come just halfway down. He came all the way down for Jacob, just like he came all the way down for us in the form of Jesus. God stands lovingly by our sides without conditions. But that by itself is not enough to create a strong, lasting relationship with the divine. As we know, all relationships take time, work, and effort. God is present beside us, but it is up to us to learn about that presence and to develop the relationship. A relationship between two humans takes a lot of work. We want to know what the other person likes and dislikes. Camping, movies, going to the gym, going for walks. We ask questions, we observe. But with God, the answers to these questions come from prayer, from reflection, reading the Bible, reading about the lives of other people who've had a close relationship with God. Each of these practices is a rung in the ladder of building a relationship with God, a relationship that requires work and time and energy. I wonder how many of us, myself included, put as much effort into building a relationship with God as we put into our relationships on social media. You know, hey God, just a sec, I'll be right with you. So if we don't work on that relationship with God daily, or even 5 times a day, like our Muslim brothers and sisters do, if we don't use our spiritual ladders at least daily, we may find that we have put them away for future use. For a time when we're retired, we've got more time on our hands, we've finished a project, or just for that unspecified time in the future sometime, when we have the time and energy to devote to God. Unfortunately, I think for many of us, myself included, that time tends not to come until we're going, I think my life is going to be over soon. And then we work on that relationship. But it needs to be something that we do every day. So how do we store our ladders? What do you do with your ladder at home? If you're like us, when we're finished using it, we take it, topple it over, and store it on the side of the garage, out of sight, up high. So what does a ladder look like when it's turned on its side? A fence. A fence. So if we don't use our spiritual ladders, if we don't build that relationship with God, then we may find that we turn our spiritual ladder into a fence. And a fence is always a barrier. A barrier between us and family, like Jacob built between himself and his family. A barrier between us and our neighbors. A barrier between us and God. A fence separates us into groups, those outside and those inside. I'm going to stand behind it next to the communion table, and you can be all out there. A fence forces us to define who is in and who is out, who is acceptable and who is not, who is worthy to be included on our side of the fence and who is not. Sometimes, as a church, I think that we take our fence and we think it's an upright ladder helping us form a relationship with the divine. Yet even thinking that, we still find ourselves making judgments, deciding who is worthy, who has the right beliefs, who behaves in the right way to be allowed onto our side of the fence. We think that by judging others, by defining who is more worthy of God, that we have climbed a rung in the ladder, when really we've just taken our ladder, toppled it over, and turned it into a fence. In this age of social media, where the self is center of the universe, it seems to be the in thing to build fences, to form an opinion on everything and everybody, and share it. From what I read in the press, on social media, when I listen to people talking, it seems like it's the in thing to do, to build fences and to form opinions. The more we are exposed to those types of judgments, the more likely we are to climb on the bandwagon and do the same thing ourselves, to judge others and build fences. But if we are to model the acceptance and love of Jesus, the acceptance and love that God showed Jacob, and the incredible acceptance and love that God shows us, then we need to learn to use our spiritual ladders every day to maintain a close relationship with the divine. It's really hard to be loving and accepting of everybody if we don't have God's help. God offered Jacob a ladder, but Jacob turned it into a fence by putting boundaries and conditions on his acceptance of the relationship with God. We as humans are prone to do the same thing. How many people do you know who have left the church because of the way we sing songs or the way people are dressed? People have left the church because the church has tried to take fences and build them into connecting ladders by welcoming members of the LGBTQ community, by welcoming those who are divorced, and by welcoming people of other faiths. How many people would you prefer to exclude from your neighborhoods because of the way they raise their children or the way they dress? Jacob did continue on his life's journey with God, not at the top of the ladder, but down beside him. He eventually did turn his fence into a ladder, and he became an honored prophet of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. For us, the hope and the joy in all of this is seeing and knowing that God puts no conditions on his relationship with us or his acceptance and blessing of us. No matter how often we turn the ladder of our relationship with the divine and with others into a fence, God remains always present, a still, small voice, beckoning each of us to take that first step in building a relationship with the divine and with each other. Thanks be to God.